Michael, can you help me? The voice cut through the hum of the shower, urgent and trembling. It was Nora, my stepsister. I forgot my clothes. Could you grab them from my room? I froze mid-step, the request catching me off guard. This wasn't the first time she'd asked me to fetch something she'd forgotten. Nora was beautiful but famously absent-minded. Yet this felt different. There was a nervousness in her tone that wasn't usually there. Sure, I replied, my voice more uncertain than I'd have liked. I climbed the stairs to her room, found the pile of clothes on her neatly made bed, and tried not to think about how her scent lingered in the room. Faint traces of vanilla and something floral. It was strange noticing that now. Why now? When I returned to the bathroom, I knocked lightly on the door. Here, I said, keeping my eyes on the ground. The door opened a crack, just wide enough for her hand to slip through and grab the clothes. But in that fleeting moment, something I wasn't prepared for happened. The warm, golden bathroom light spilled out, framing her silhouette through the half-open door. Her pale, damp skin glistened, every curve catching the light like a sculptor's masterpiece. My brain screamed at me to look away, but my eyes didn't obey in time. I felt a knot of guilt twist in my stomach. Nora muttered a quick thanks and shut the door. I stood there for a moment, heart pounding against my ribcage like I'd run a marathon. What had just happened? Why was my body reacting like this? She was my stepsister, family even if not by blood. But from that night on, something changed. At first, I told myself it was nothing. A fluke. A trick of the light. But the image of her stayed burned into my mind like an afterimage you couldn't blink away. Every detail. Every curve. My hands trembled as I washed them in the kitchen sink later that night, trying to scrub the thoughts from my brain like dirt under my nails. But it didn't work. The days that followed were a blur of trying too hard to act normal. I avoided Nora as much as I could, though I knew it was only a matter of time before she noticed my strange behavior. Every laugh of hers, every teasing joke, felt sharper than before. Her liberal sense of style, tight-fitting clothes that hugged her in ways I couldn't ignore, made it worse. Each casual glance in her direction felt like a betrayal of something sacred. Then there were the nights. Lying in bed, the quiet of the house wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket, the memories would creep back in. Her silhouette in the doorway. The way her voice echoed in the steam-filled bathroom. I couldn't escape it. I didn't sleep much anymore. I knew it was wrong, so wrong that the guilt felt like it was seeping into my very bones. But no amount of reasoning could make it go away. I caught myself staring at her one evening when she was sitting on the couch, her legs tucked underneath her, scrolling through her phone. The low hum of the TV filled the room, but my focus was entirely on her. She looked up, caught my gaze, and smiled. A sweet, oblivious smile that made me want to bury my head in shame. "Why are you so quiet lately?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "You're usually full of dumb jokes." I managed a weak laugh. "Just tired. Work's been crazy." It wasn't a lie. My part-time job at a local cafe had been busy lately, but that wasn't what kept me up at night. She studied me for a moment longer, as if trying to pull some deeper truth from my expression, then shrugged and went back to her phone. The weight of her attention, brief as it was, felt like both a gift and a curse. I needed to get out of my head, to reset. Anything to push away the thoughts that kept me spiraling further into this mess. But no matter how hard I tried to focus on anything else, work, hobbies, friends, Nora was there, lodged in the back of my mind like a splinter I couldn't remove. And I was afraid of what that meant. I didn't know it then, but that was only the beginning. I thought time would fix it. That a few days, maybe a week, would wash away the tension like rain clearing dust off the pavement. But it didn't. If anything, it grew heavier. I'd find myself zoning out at work, steaming milk for lattes until my manager, Claire, would tap me on the shoulder and snap me back to reality. "Michael, you okay? You've been spacing out a lot," she'd said one morning, her concerned tone pulling me out of yet another daydream. Yeah, I lied, forcing a smile. Just tired. It was the same excuse I gave everyone, but even I wasn't buying it anymore. The problem wasn't just that one night. It was everything after. It was Nora, lounging in the kitchen on a lazy Saturday morning, wearing one of those oversized t-shirts that barely skimmed her thighs. The way she'd casually tie her hair up while humming along to a playlist, her movements so effortless and graceful that it felt like they were mocking my struggle to keep my composure. Or the scent of her perfume, a light, floral mix that lingered long after she'd left a room. I couldn't walk through the hallway without catching a faint whiff of it and feeling my pulse quicken, as if it were some cruel Pavlovian response. I started avoiding her without making it too obvious. If she was in the living room, I'd retreat to my room. If she was in the kitchen, I'd suddenly remember an errand I needed to run. But the house wasn't big enough to avoid her entirely. One evening, we were both in the living room, Nora sprawled on the couch watching some reality show. I sat stiffly in the armchair, pretending to scroll through my phone, but barely seeing the screen. Every time she shifted, every time her laugh rang out, it felt like a jolt straight to my chest. At one point, she leaned forward to grab the remote, her t-shirt slipping slightly off her shoulder. It was such a small, unintentional gesture, but my throat tightened, and I had to look away. "Hey," she said, turning to me. "You've been acting weird lately. What's going on?" Her question hung in the air, and for a moment, I panicked. Did she know? Had she caught on to the war raging inside my head? "I'm fine," I said quickly, too quickly. "Just a lot on my mind." Nora raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "You sure? You've been so quiet. It's not like you." I forced a smile, one that I hoped looked convincing.
"Yeah, just stuff at work. Don't worry about it."
She studied me for a beat longer before shrugging. "Well, if you ever want to talk about it, I'm here," she said, her voice light but sincere. The irony almost made me laugh. She had no idea that she was the problem. The nights were the worst. That was when my thoughts were loudest. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying that fleeting moment outside the bathroom over and over again. The way the light had framed her, the curve of her silhouette. It felt like my mind was betraying me, dragging me down a path I didn't want to go but couldn't seem to resist. I started dreading bedtime, knowing the memories would come rushing back the moment I was alone in the dark. I tried to distract myself, scrolling through social media, watching mindless videos, but nothing worked. One night, I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing from a dream I couldn't fully remember, but left me feeling ashamed nonetheless. I sat on the edge of my bed, my head in my hands, trying to steady my breathing. "This has to stop," I muttered to myself, the words sounding hollow even as I said them. The next morning, I decided I needed an escape. I called up Ethan, one of my oldest friends, and asked if he wanted to hang out. "Dude, you've been a ghost lately," he said when I showed up at his place. "Yeah, just stuff," I mumbled. "Stuff? You mean like girl stuff?" he teased, nudging me with his elbow. I forced a laugh. "Something like that." We spent the day shooting hoops and grabbing burgers, but even as I tried to lose myself in the normalcy of it all, Nora's presence lingered in the back of my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake. When I got home that evening, the house was quiet except for the faint sound of music coming from Nora's room. I paused at her door, hesitating for reasons I couldn't quite explain, before shaking my head and walking away. I didn't want to feel this way. I didn't want to notice the little things, the way her laughter could light up a room, the way her confidence made her seem untouchable, yet so effortlessly close. But I couldn't stop, and I was starting to wonder if I ever would. It was supposed to be a lazy Saturday, just me lounging around the house in sweatpants, trying to forget how tense things had been lately. I had no big plans, no reason to care about much beyond eating cereal straight from the box and scrolling through random YouTube videos. But as fate would have it, the universe had other plans. I heard Nora calling from the kitchen. Michael, can you come here for a second? Yeah, give me a minute, I yelled back, not really in a hurry to leave the comfort of my room. Tossing on a loose t-shirt, I padded downstairs in my sweatpants, completely forgetting one critical detail. When I walked into the kitchen, she was standing at the counter, her hair tied up in a messy bun and her tank top casually slipping off one shoulder. She glanced up from whatever she was chopping and smiled. Hey, can you grab the olive oil from the top shelf? I can't reach. Sure, I said, reaching for the cabinet. As I stretched, I felt my sweatpants slip down slightly, just a bit, but it was enough to realize I wasn't wearing any underwear. Before I could adjust, Nora glanced over, and her eyes widened. For a split second, the air in the room froze. Then she burst out laughing, loud, uncontrollable laughter that echoed off the kitchen walls. What? I asked, already feeling the heat rush to my face. Nora turned away, covering her mouth to stifle her laughter. Oh my God, Michael. Are you seriously walking around like that? Like what? I asked, feigning ignorance while I desperately adjusted my pants, my face now burning hotter than the stovetop. You're so obvious, she managed between fits of giggles, pointing toward me without even looking. I wanted to disappear into the floor. Okay, I didn't exactly plan this, all right? I muttered, trying to salvage what little dignity I had left. She finally turned back, her laughter subsiding into a sly smile. You really need to be more careful. What if Mom or Dad had seen you? Her tone was teasing, playful, but there was something in her expression, in the way her eyes lingered just a little too long, that made my chest tighten. It wasn't just amusement. There was curiosity there, maybe even something I didn't want to acknowledge. Yeah, lesson learned, I said, grabbing the olive oil and setting it on the counter. Can we just forget this happened? Nora grinned, leaning slightly against the counter, her eyes sparkling. Oh, I'm definitely not forgetting this. I escaped to my room as quickly as I could, slamming the door shut behind me. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I sank onto my bed, covering my face with my hands, replaying the moment in my head over and over again. Her laughter had been light, almost musical. But it was her smile, the way it lingered, the way her eyes had seemed to see straight through me, that I couldn't shake. What did it mean? Was I imagining things? Was it all in my head? The rest of the day passed in a haze of embarrassment and overthinking. I avoided Nora like the plague, sticking to my room and only venturing out when I was sure she wasn't around. But even in the solitude of my space, I couldn't escape the memory. Every detail of her reaction replayed in my mind, the way her lips curved into that teasing smile, the way she tilted her head as if sizing me up, the way her voice softened just slightly when she said, "You're so obvious." It wasn't just teasing. It couldn't have been. By evening, I tried to convince myself I was reading too much into it, that it was just a harmless, awkward moment between two people who happened to live under the same roof. But when I ventured out to grab a snack, I found Nora sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I passed by and smirked. Feeling more secure now? Very funny, I mumbled, not even stopping to look at her. Her laughter followed me into the kitchen. Oh, come on, don't be such a baby about it, she called out. I rolled my eyes, grabbing a soda from the fridge, but my hands were shaking. There was no way she didn't know what she was doing. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Her teasing, her smile, the way her presence filled the room like she owned it. She was so carefree, so utterly unbothered by everything, and I was the exact opposite, tied up in a million knots of confusion and guilt. This wasn't normal. It wasn't okay. And yet, when I closed my eyes, all I could see was her smile, her eyes watching me with a flicker of something I couldn't name. It started off harmless, or at least that's what I told myself. Just another lazy afternoon, with the house quiet except for the low hum of the TV. I was at the dining table, pretending to focus on an overdue project for work, while Nora sprawled out on the couch, flipping through her phone. "Michael," she called out, her tone light but carrying that unmistakable edge that always meant trouble. "Yeah," I replied, not looking up. "Do you think I'm pretty?" The question hit me like a rogue wave, unexpected and disorienting. I glanced up, my stomach twisting into knots. She was still staring at her phone, as if the question was casual, like asking about the weather. "What?" I stammered, trying to sound indifferent. She finally looked at me, one eyebrow raised. "Do you think I'm pretty?" The room seemed to shrink around me. My mouth went dry, and my brain scrambled to find a safe response. Yeah, I guess so," I muttered, hoping that would be enough to end it. She tilted her head, a mischievous smile playing on her lips. "You guess so? That's not much of a compliment. I mean, you're fine." "I don't know what you want me to say," I said quickly, my voice coming out more defensive than I'd intended. Nora laughed, the sound low and warm, but there was something behind it, a curiosity, maybe even a challenge. "Relax, I'm just teasing," she said, standing up and stretching in that slow, deliberate way that made my chest tighten. "You're so easy to mess with." I forced a laugh, but inside, I was anything but relaxed. Over the next few days, the questions didn't stop. They weren't always as direct, but they were always there, threaded into conversations like hooks waiting to snag me. "Why don't you ever talk about girls? Don't you have a crush on anyone? You've never brought anyone home. Are you secretly married to your job? You know, you'd look good if you actually put some effort into your style." Each comment was laced with that same teasing tone, but her eyes always lingered a little too long. Her words always felt a little too sharp, like they were designed to cut through whatever walls I was trying to build. One evening, it came to a head. I was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, when Nora walked in, barefoot, and wearing an oversized hoodie that somehow still managed to look effortlessly stylish on her. She leaned against the counter, watching me. "Do you think I'd look good in red?" she asked out of nowhere. I glanced at her, caught off guard yet again. "I don't know." "Sure." She rolled her eyes. "You're terrible at this. Would it kill you to give a straight answer for once?" "Okay," I said, setting down the dish towel. "Yeah, you'd look good in red." "There, happy?" A slow smile spread across her face, and she took a step closer.
See?
Was that so hard? Her voice was soft, almost playful, but her proximity made it hard to breathe. I could smell her perfume again, that same floral scent that had been haunting me for weeks. "Nora, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She shrugged, her eyes locking onto mine. "Nothing. Just wondering why you get so weird every time I talk to you." "I don't get weird," I said, taking a step back. "You do," she said, following me. "You barely look at me anymore. You used to laugh at my jokes. Now it's like you're scared of me or something." "I'm not scared of you," I said, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Then what is it?" she asked, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "What's going on with you?" I didn't have an answer, at least not one I could say out loud. How was I supposed to tell her that every time she walked into the room, I felt like I was losing control? That her smile, her laugh, the way she moved, all of it had become a trap I couldn't escape? "I'm fine," I said finally, forcing the words out. "You're imagining things." She stared at me for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, she smiled, a soft, almost knowing smile that made my stomach flip. "Okay," she said, turning toward the doorway. "If you say so." But as she left the room, she glanced back over her shoulder, her eyes meeting mine for just a second longer than necessary. It was a small moment, barely noticeable, but it felt like a spark catching fire. That night, as I lay in bed, her words echoed in my mind. "You're scared of me, aren't you?" I wasn't scared of her. I was scared of myself, scared of what I was feeling, scared of what it meant. Because deep down, I knew our connection wasn't what it should be. And no matter how hard I tried to fight it, I was losing. It was late. The kind of late where the house was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the walls settling. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself from my restless thoughts. That's when I heard the knock. Soft, hesitant, and so unexpected at this hour that it made my heart skip. Before I could even answer, the door creaked open and there she was. Nora. She stood there in the dim light of the hallway, wearing light blue pajamas that hung loosely off her shoulders, the silky fabric catching the faint glow. Her hair was messy, as if she'd just rolled out of bed, and she was clutching her phone in both hands. "Hey," she said, her voice soft and unsure. "I didn't mean to bother you, but can you help me with something? My phone's acting weird, and I don't know what's wrong." I swallowed hard, nodding without saying a word. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her, and handed me the phone. "What's it doing?" I asked, trying to focus on the screen rather than the way the light caught her collarbone or the subtle scent of her perfume. "It keeps crashing when I open an app," she said, sitting down on the edge of my bed, too close for comfort. I tried restarting it, but it didn't help. I nodded, pretending to examine the phone. "Probably needs an update," I muttered. The room felt smaller with her in it, the air thick with something I couldn't name. She watched me in silence, her gaze heavy, as if she wasn't really interested in the phone at all. When I handed it back to her, explaining what to do, she didn't take it. Instead, she tilted her head, her eyes locked onto mine. "Michael," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What?" I asked, my heart pounding. She hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. "Do you ever feel like there's something between us?" Her words hit me like a freight train. I froze, unable to process what she was saying, much less respond. "What are you talking about?" I managed, though my voice was shaky. "You know what I mean," she said, her tone soft but insistent. "It's not just me, is it? I see the way you look at me. I feel it every time we're in the same room." "Nora," I started, but she cut me off. "I'm not imagining this, Michael," she said, her voice trembling now. "You feel it too, don't you?" I stood up, needing to put distance between us, needing to think. "This is insane," I said, running a hand through my hair. "You're my sister. Well, stepsister. But still, this isn't." "I'm not saying it makes sense," she interrupted, standing as well. "I'm just saying it's real. You can't deny it." "I can and I will," I said firmly, though the words felt like sandpaper in my throat. "Whatever you think this is, it has to stop." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You don't mean that." "I do," I said, though I couldn't look her in the eye. The silence that followed was unbearable. She stood there, inches away, and I could feel her presence like a weight pressing down on me. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter than before. "You're lying to yourself, Michael. You can pretend all you want, but I know you feel it too." I couldn't take it anymore. "You need to leave," I said, my voice sharp.
Now.
Her expression faltered, hurt flashing across her face before she quickly masked it. "Fine," she said, turning toward the door. But just as she reached for the handle, she paused and looked back at me. "Just so you know," she said, her voice steady now, "I'm not sorry for telling you how I feel." And then she was gone, leaving me alone in the suffocating quiet of my room. I collapsed onto the bed, my head in my hands. Her words echoed in my mind, refusing to leave. "You're lying to yourself." Was she right?
No.
She couldn't be. This was wrong. It had to be wrong. But as much as I wanted to forget everything she'd said, I couldn't. Her voice, her eyes, the way she'd looked at me, it was all burned into my memory, impossible to erase. I lay awake for hours that night, staring at the ceiling, the weight of her confession pressing down on me like a lead blanket. And no matter how many times I told myself it was wrong, that it didn't matter, one truth kept creeping back into my mind. I couldn't forget her. The decision wasn't sudden. It crept in like a storm on the horizon, slowly, steadily, and then all at once. Every glance, every word, every moment with Nora felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling, and I was running out of ways to hold it together. Something had to change. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the blank piece of paper in front of me. I'd written reasons to move out at the top, hoping it would help me organize my thoughts, but the page remained empty. How was I supposed to put into words something I couldn't even admit to myself? My parents weren't going to understand. Why would they? To them, everything looked fine. The house was quiet, there was no conflict, and I had a decent part-time job to keep me busy. They didn't see the cracks forming beneath the surface. They didn't see how I was falling apart. At dinner that night, the tension felt heavier than usual. My dad was scrolling through his phone while my mom chatted about her coworker's vacation. Nora sat across from me, silent but present, her fork moving aimlessly through her salad. I couldn't look at her. "Michael," my mom said, snapping me out of my thoughts. "You've barely touched your food. Everything okay?" I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. This was the moment. "I've been thinking about moving out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The words hung in the air, freezing the conversation mid-sentence. My dad set his phone down, and my mom's smile faltered. "Moving out," she repeated, as if she hadn't heard me right. "Yeah," I said, forcing myself to meet their eyes. "I think it's time I got my own place. Learn to be independent." My dad frowned. "You're only 22. You're still figuring things out. There's no rush to leave." "I know," I said quickly, "but I feel like it's something I need to do. For myself." My mom's worry was written all over her face. "Are you unhappy here? Did we do something wrong?" No, it's not like that," I assured her, though the guilt was already building in my chest. "It's just, I think I need space. To grow, I guess." Nora finally spoke, her voice quiet but sharp. "Space from what?" Her words cut through me like a knife, but I didn't look at her. I couldn't. "Just space," I said, avoiding her gaze. The conversation dragged on, my parents peppering me with questions about rent, budgeting, and how I planned to manage on my own. I answered mechanically, my mind miles away. When the discussion finally ended, my mom reluctantly nodded. "If this is what you feel is best, we'll support you. But just remember, you always have a place here." Her words hit harder than I expected, and for a moment, I wanted to take it all back. But then I felt Nora's eyes on me again, and the weight of everything came crashing down. This was the only way. That night, as I packed up my room, Nora appeared in the doorway. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You're really leaving?" she asked. I didn't look up. "Yeah." "Because of me?" Her words made my hands freeze mid-movement. I took a deep breath, then turned to face her. "It's not just you, Nora. It's everything. I need to figure out who I am, and I can't do that here." Her eyes softened, but there was something else there too. Hurt, maybe even regret. "You don't have to go. We can figure this out." "There's nothing to figure out," I said, my voice firm. "This is what's best for both of us." She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "If that's what you want." The next morning, I loaded the last of my boxes into my car. My parents stood on the porch, watching with forced smiles, while Nora lingered in the doorway, her expression distant. As I hugged my mom goodbye, she whispered, "You'll be okay, Michael. Just don't forget, we're always here for you." "I know," I said, though the lump in my throat made it hard to speak. When it was Nora's turn, she didn't say anything. She just stepped forward, wrapped her arms around me, and held on for a moment longer than she should have. "Take care of yourself," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "You too," I replied, my chest tightening. Driving away, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, but the weight on my chest didn't lift. I should have felt free, relieved even. Instead, all I felt was an aching emptiness. This was the right choice, I told myself over and over again. But as I pulled into the parking lot of my new apartment, a question I couldn't ignore echoed in my mind. Why did it feel like I was leaving a part of myself behind? The first night in my new apartment was unbearable. The walls were bare, the space felt cold, and every creak or distant car horn reminded me how alone I was. The tiny studio in the heart of the city was everything I thought I wanted: freedom, independence, space to start over. But all I felt was a gnawing emptiness. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the unopened boxes that lined the walls. They felt heavier than they had during the move, as if unpacking them would somehow force me to unpack everything I was trying to leave behind. This was the right choice, I reminded myself. It had to be. In the days that followed, I threw myself into the routines of a new life. Work became my anchor. I picked up extra shifts at the cafe, filling every spare hour with the hum of espresso machines and the chatter of customers. My coworkers noticed the change. "You're really going all in, huh?" Claire said one evening as I wiped down the counters for the third time. "Yeah," I replied with a shrug. "Keeps me busy." But no matter how much I worked, the quiet moments crept in. I'd walk home past crowded bars and couples strolling hand in hand, and I'd wonder if this was what I'd traded everything for, a life spent running from my own thoughts. Nora didn't call. At first, it was a relief. I told myself that the silence meant she was moving on, that she was okay, and that we'd both made the right decision. But as the days stretched into weeks, the silence began to sting. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone, scrolling through old messages, hovering over her name in my contacts. I never called. I couldn't, because I knew that hearing her voice, even just for a moment, would unravel everything I'd built. One night, as I sat on my tiny balcony overlooking the city, I thought about the promise I'd made to myself. I wasn't leaving to run away. I was leaving to protect her, to protect us. Whatever had sparked between us wasn't her fault, and it wasn't mine either. It was a moment, a collision of feelings that neither of us understood. But moments like that could ruin lives. I couldn't let that happen. I started journaling, something I hadn't done since high school. It felt strange at first, putting my thoughts onto paper, but it became a ritual. Each night, I'd sit at my desk, pen in hand, and pour everything out. The guilt, the confusion, the faint echoes of longing I couldn't seem to shake. One night, I wrote a simple promise. I will not let this define me. It became my mantra. Whenever the memories crept in, her laughter, her smile, the way she'd looked at me that night, I'd repeat the words to myself like a shield. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, life began to feel normal again. I made friends at work, explored the city, and even went on a few dates. They were casual, nothing serious, but they reminded me that there was a world outside of the one I'd left behind. But Nora was always there, a quiet presence in the back of my mind. I wondered if she hated me for leaving, if she ever thought about me, if she understood why I had to go. One day, I received a package from home, a box of things I'd left behind. Tucked inside was a handwritten note from my mom. "We miss you. Come visit when you're ready." The words felt like a lifeline, a reminder that no matter how far I ran, I still had a place to come back to. Months later, I finally returned. It wasn't planned. I just woke up one morning and realized I was ready. The house looked the same as it always had, familiar and warm, like a snapshot frozen in time. My mom cried when she saw me, pulling me into a tight hug, while my dad clapped me on the shoulder, his eyes misty. Nora was quieter. She lingered in the doorway, watching as I unpacked my things in the guest room. "Hey," she said finally. "Hey," I replied, my heart hammering in my chest. For a moment, we just stood there, the weight of everything unsaid filling the space between us. Then she smiled, a small, cautious smile, and said, "It's good to have you back." "Yeah," I said, swallowing hard. "It's good to be back." That night, as I lay in bed, listening to the familiar creaks of the house, I felt a strange sense of peace. I wasn't sure if things would ever be the same between us, but I knew one thing for certain. Leaving was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was the right thing. Because sometimes loving someone means stepping away.